Okay, so Jennifer, it's so nice to have you here on the podcast. I have so many things to ask you, but I wanted to just start with maybe a little bit of your backstory. Tell us what it is you do now, kind of what brought you to this point, and just catch us up a bit.
So I'm originally from Zimbabwe. I was born and raised there. I ended up going to England. I pursued a career as a ballet teacher. So I ended up going to England for a few years to pursue my ballet training. And then I ended up coming to Canada to teach ballet. And I teach at the Alberta Ballet School in the professional division. So I've had a long and happy career there. And then, of course, during COVID, I was laid off and ended up being home with my two little girls. So I've mostly spent the last 2 years at home with my 4 and 5-year-old. And it was during COVID and that long stretch of time at home that I thought, I always wrote a lot. When I was younger, I wrote all through my life, different phases of my life in different ways. And during COVID, I actually found I had time to get back to my writing that had been on the back burner when I had 2 babies a year apart. So it'd been a few years there where it was difficult just to have the space and time to write.
Yeah.
And so in the last year, I had decided to look more seriously into my writing. I joined a couple of writing groups. The Canada Writes group has been a wonderful writing group to be part of. And the editor for Off Topic Publishing there got in touch with me and said that she would like to include some of my work in an anthology she was releasing. And she said to me, if you're interested, I would really like to publish a collection of your own work. So that was a really momentous time for me. I never imagined I would be a published author. And so the chapbook that Off Topic Publishing is releasing is called All Forgotten Now. And that comes out this month in time for National Poetry Month.
Oh, that's amazing. Good timing.
Yes.
Your story really resonated with me because I'm a writing teacher, mostly academic writing, but I do teach creative writing as well. And I have for like 20 years now. But I dabbled in fiction writing, novels, fiction for women for probably on and off for about 10 years. And the road to publishing is very difficult. I've been published academically, but I kind of put that aside and moved on to other things. But that's always been a dream. And I think you find your way back to writing in different ways. You said that you did write before. Were you writing poetry before, or was it something different?
I started writing as a child, and as a child, I started writing fiction because that's what captivated me. And, as I got a little bit older, probably into my teen years, I started writing poetry. I have a wonderful mother who gave me the gift of words and books, who read to me as a child, who gave me volumes of poetry, who would read poetry to me when I was sick in bed. And so, it really captivated me. And during my teen years, I started writing a lot more poetry. And I found that was really my outlet for writing. And it was never got shared with anybody. It was just for me. It was an outlet. In my 20s, I had a blog about eating disorders. As a dancer, I had suffered with anorexia and bulimia. And so, I blogged a little bit and found a huge community of people out there that resonated with. And along the way, I was always writing poetry. So that was something that kind of developed in my teens and in my 20s. And then I had got back to it in the last year and just found that there was so much more left in it for me. And I'd put it on the back burner, and I had never really thought seriously about coming back to it.
Yeah, it's funny how things work out. So you have quite an experience. You lived in Zimbabwe, and you mentioned that prior to your move to Canada. Can you talk to us about living in Zimbabwe, being born there, choosing to leave, just anything you want to share about that experience?
Yeah, I feel very fortunate to have been born in Zimbabwe. It is a beautiful country. My family is mostly still there. And being raised there, I had a very privileged upbringing. Obviously, I enjoyed my childhood, my life there. I didn't know any different as a child, but I could see when I was young that there was rampant racism. There was so much poverty there. The 80s were a really big boom in Zimbabwe just after independence. And towards the end of the 90s, there started to be a lot of political and economical instability and turmoil. And there weren't a lot of opportunities, especially in ballet in Zimbabwe. But a lot of people my age were leaving the country to pursue their tertiary education and to look at settling elsewhere, because it didn't afford young people a lot of opportunities at the time. Which is very sad. I think for a lot of us, it was kind of inevitable that we would all leave. And some of us hoped to go back. I hoped for many years to go back and start again there. And that's something that I deal with in the chapbook, All Forgotten Now, is the grief of leaving home and realizing as the years stretched out that it was very unlikely I was going to be going back. I also address, the privilege of being white in post-independence Zimbabwe, the amazing childhood and upbringing that I had, but also, the fact that it was set against that racism and that poverty, and that the life I had was not the life that most Zimbabweans lived.
What did your parents do in Zimbabwe?
My dad ran his own medical business, and also he turned his musical hobby into a shop where he sold musical instruments. My mom is a teacher. She's always taught, so between two working parents, we had a decent upbringing and a really good life. And that was not the reality for most people living there.
Do you have brothers and sisters who also moved?
Both my brothers still live in Zimbabwe. I had my dad's family immigrated to England in the 80s, and my mom's side of the family also immigrated to England in the 80s. I think the first mass exodus was after independence. And then the next mass exodus was towards the late 90s, early 2000s, when things started to really go downhill.
Okay. So to switch gears a little bit, but I will come back to this. You mentioned in your bio, when I was looking at the publisher's site for your book, that you do have a history of anorexia and bulimia that has, of course, shaped who you are today, or contributed to that. Can you talk about that? I think that's something so many women can really relate to, even if they're afraid to talk about it.
Yeah, I think sadly it's something that's just not talked about enough. And I know from my own experience, a lot of people suffer with their relationship with food, whether they have a full-blown eating disorder or just, disordered eating in some way, that diet culture, that poor relationship with food. Obviously, being in the ballet industry, and also the personality type that I had, I was highly perfectionistic. I was in the ballet industry. I didn't have what we would call the ballet body type. So for me, I was constantly fighting against my genetics to be thinner, to look like a dancer. And back when I was dancing, people didn't have any qualms about telling you needed to be thinner, you needed to lose weight. You couldn't, you didn't have the right body, so you needed to do something about it. And I'm very thankful in this day and age that we don't teach that way anymore. Those are not conversations we have with dancers anymore. But yeah, it was life altering for me. There was 23 years of my life that I was incredibly ill for, having anorexia and bulimia. There were times in there that I was better, and there were times in there when I was incredibly ill. And it was only when I got pregnant with my first daughter that I realized that it was no longer about me and my body. And especially having two daughters, it was something that I was determined to overcome, for their sake more than mine at the time. And I remember the eating disorder therapist telling me, recovering for other people generally doesn't work. You have to want it for yourself. And I never wanted it for myself, but I did want it for my daughters. And I've been recovered now for 6.5 going on 7 years. I'm very thankful to God that I came through that and out the other side. But, I know that it's very prevalent in our culture, and it is really something that's not spoken about.
Yeah. How were you able to overcome it? Was it years of therapy? Was it self-study? Was it sheer willpower? How did you do it?
I went through the Calgary Eating Disorder Program, which I recommend. It's wonderful. Really, for me, the crux of the matter was having a baby. And it was one thing to self-destruct. It was one thing to abuse myself and to live in that misery and to suffer. And I realized I would never be a good mom if I was suffering from anorexia and bulimia. That took up all my time. It took up my energy, my mental energy. I was always physically tired. I was unwell. how I'd managed to, to work all those years to the degree that I did, just not talking about it, weight fluctuating up and down, and all that suffering. It was really for me being pregnant and thinking, there is another life relying on me here, and I can be a well mom or I can be a sick mom. And I'd never wanted the tragedy of my eating disorder to be that my children would learn it from me.
Yeah, which is actually the perfect segue into what I wanted to ask next, was your transition into motherhood. So once you became a mother, just talk about how your life changed. Maybe tell us about your little girls and what you want them to know and to believe about themselves, about their own bodies, just in general as women as they grow older.
Yeah, my segue into motherhood was wonderful. I had my babies at the age of 34 and 35. So I'd been able to have my career, and the love of my life had been ballet. I had danced since I was 5. I had had a wonderful teaching career at a professional school. So I felt very fulfilled that I'd had all those experiences, and I was very ready to be a mom and to have my babies. I had them a year apart, which was also an interesting experience. And I highly recommend it. It is hard work in the beginning. And now I have these little girls. They're almost like having twins.
Yeah.
And, I've loved motherhood. It's been tiring. It's been exhausting. But overall, it's just brought me so much joy, these little girls. And I'm so grateful for them. And I think for my daughters, we do have conversations about bodies. We talk about food, we talk about bodies. And in our house, I am trying a different way of raising kids so that they grow to know that a body is a body. It comes in different shapes, different sizes. The way that your body is perfect. And we talk about food as well. I'm using the intuitive eating model for my children.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, which is, you decide what you're serving and when, you decide if they're eating and how much. So we don't do food bargaining. We don't label foods. There's no good food. There's no bad food. Everything is just acceptable. So
Right.
I think from all my years of, reading and studying, and people who are immersed in eating disorders know so much about good food and good nutrition. We don't do it, but we know about it. We read and we count calories and we see nutritionists when we're trying to recover. So I felt like I had a wealth of knowledge and experience, and a girlfriend had given me a book about intuitive eating. And so that's the model that I followed with my children. And my greatest hope for them is that they will grow up in a culture where we don't praise women for what they look like and what their body size is.
That would be wonderful, wouldn't it? In an ideal world.
It'd be revolutionary.
Yeah, I've noticed, actually my husband pointed it out. He was at the mall with my son. I have 3 boys, and he was just taking him clothes shopping, and my son had a friend with him. So my husband was kind of wandering around the mall by himself, and he called and he said, "Did you notice that when you look at these stores, everything has changed? Like Victoria's Secret, it used to be, waif-like models who now we know the stories of, eating disorders and the suffering that they endure just to be models for Victoria's Secret, right? This great thing. But now you just see pictures of women. They're like these life-size pictures of real women, just everyday women. And they've kind of erased that, that stigma altogether. So I think that it's going in that direction. It's just a slow movement.
Yeah, I wish for everyone's sake that it was just fast enough. And I do think these conversations are so important to have. And I do have them with other mums, when they talk about, I'm trying to get my child to finish their dinner and, that kind of thing. Like we have these, I just have these conversations, and I think, there just needs to be more education, more awareness. There needs to be more representation of what real bodies are. And I am in an industry that, as a ballet dancer and a teacher, that still has an ideal body type, and that is a difficult thing.
Yeah, but it almost makes, we think of these stories and the places we've come from, and a lot of us have some kind of place of suffering. Your eating disorder of, so many years has led you to be able to influence a community now, though. So do you see it as a bit of a gift in a way, in that you are able to help those going forward and future generations of women?
I hope so. I think because I know some signs and symptoms to look for. There's been times where I've had conversations about dancers in the studio. I've said to other teachers or, the supervisor, I think that there might be a problem there. I think we still are very geared to understand that if somebody has an eating disorder, they look like a skeleton.
Yeah.
And so I try to educate in my workplace in general that eating disorders don't have a size or a type, and they affect everybody. And so, you know, there's other things we need to be looking for: fatigue, injury, before we're looking for somebody who is a walking skeleton. So I have tried to use this as a gift to help other people, to bring some awareness, you know, for people who have been lucky enough in the industry to not suffer in that way. And, you know, to speak to my dancers about food for fueling your body, and to rest, and to eat, and to drink, and how important that is. You know, and we really are in that direction in the industry now. We want fit dancers, we want healthy dancers. And unfortunately, it still is that your body is the instrument, your tool that you use. So, you know, we dance in front of mirrors. We're in leotards and tights. It's it's really a double-edged sword, I think.
Yeah. Okay, so I wanted to go back to well, to your poetry in general, but it starts from your move from Zimbabwe to Canada, or did you go to England before you went to Canada?
I went to England for 3 years to a ballet school before I came to teach in Canada.
Okay, so you mentioned that your poetry is kind of the story of your grief in many aspects, of leaving a place that you considered home, that you loved. Can you maybe talk about how that how that exile influenced your poetry? And then I wanted to ask you if you could maybe share one of your poems with us.
So I left Zimbabwe by choice to pursue a career in dance because there weren't a lot of opportunities there for tertiary education in ballet. I also, over time, came to realize that there weren't a lot of job opportunities there. And given the political climate at the time, did I want to live there? And because I was young, I thought, you know, I'll travel for a while. I'll get a job in Canada and spend a year there. You know, whenever you go somewhere, you kind of start to put down roots. Seems to be our tendency to put down roots. I always thought, oh, I'll pick up again in a year and move. And you get a good job and you get a community of friends, and, you know, you find somewhere to live, you make it a little bit home-like. So it gets harder and harder to move. And I would go back every year, every other year, as often as I could afford to go home. I went home to see my family. And I found that initially in the beginning, my poetry was about the landscape. It was about the things that I missed: the trees, the flowers, the smells, the sights, the sounds. Zimbabwe is beautiful, the animals. And so I wrote about those things that I missed. And then in time, I came to write about what it was like to try to belong somewhere else. I'm white, identifying, and English is my first language. And so I came to Canada, where I found myself surrounded by people who looked like me and spoke the same language as me. And I still felt like I didn't belong. So there's poems that kind of go through that, trying to belong somewhere that you don't actually think of as your home, and what it's like to try to settle in. The book also deals with, in my later writing, I went back to look at the racism and the poverty in Zimbabwe and to write about those. And then towards the end of All Forgotten Now, there are some poems that are a little bit more hopeful. They're about how I've found a home because I've had children here. And so now I have a different connection to this place.
Different set of roots too. And I can see the art behind you. It looks like an influence from there as well.
Yes, and in All Forgotten Now, there's a lot of poems that reference trees, so you'll have to look out for those.
Ah, for sure. And I will make sure I get a copy. Are you comfortable reading one of your poems?
I will read my poems. Yeah, I actually chose one of the poems for you that it was written for my children. So it's towards the end of the book. In the story, we start in All Forgotten Now. We start in Zimbabwe, growing up as a child with the racism. We move on to leaving, to missing the landscape, to poetry, trying to belong. And then towards the end of the book, it's more hopeful note. And so this poem is from a collection called Star and Song that I wrote for my children, and I will read it for you.
Okay.
It says, "These mountains are not mine, but they belong to my children. They will hear the valleys and the rivers call to them as I do not. They will yearn for this Arctic sun as I for an African one, and they will call this land home, though I will never rest here. They will hear the singing voices of these people as I hear in my heart the songs of dirt roads and bougainvilleas and September skies lost to me. My children will stand firm upon this land, and when they belong to it, I will remember that I belong to them, and I am entirely at home when their faces shine upon me.
Oh, that's so beautiful. In fact, as you were reading that, I was wishing I taught world literature and British literature for a long time. That would have been an amazing poem to actually share with kids today.
Thank you.
Very pretty. Okay, so we're getting toward the end here where we're winding down a little bit. I did want to ask you, I think other women like to hear about what a typical day is like for other women, writers, entrepreneurs. We're all in just so many different fields. Can you tell us what a typical day is like for you now?
A typical day, I mean, with kids, there's the usual ticking over of schedule. My kids go to school twice a week, so those are school days. I have a husband who works a week away, a week back, sometimes 2 and 2. So I feel like life is really in flux. Generally, first thing in the morning when I'm up and my kids are fed, I try to do poetry work. So I'll be working with my editor, Mariani, at Off Topic Publishing. We'll be discussing marketing for the book. I'll be working on poetry itself, ways to submit poetry. I'm working on a few other collections of poetry at the moment that I hope to publish in the future. Right now, we're mostly focused on All Forgotten Now. So we're looking at podcasts, interviews, hopefully doing some book signings and things like that. Sure. So I try to get that work done in the morning. And then, sometimes like this week, my husband is back, so I will be in the studio teaching ballet. And so every week is just kind of in flux. And then Marian and I launched the poetry box as well with Off Topic Publishing. So we will be going, we're send a monthly postcard with poetry and tea and chocolate, and that's on the ground here in Calgary. So this week I'll be picking up tea samples and chocolate samples. So a typical day is hard to kind of say. I don't have the same pattern every single day. It just depends on what's on the agenda.
Yep. Well, I can relate to that as well. I feel like every day is different these days. Okay, so I only have 2 more questions for you. I'm going to kind of wrap this one together. What would you say was your biggest challenge getting to where you are now, just through your whole journey? And what has been your greatest joy?
I would say on the writing side of things, the biggest challenge was actually getting back to finding the time for myself to do something that I had always enjoyed that was important to me. And, as a mom, my priority is my children. And so it took me a few years to realize that there are actually spaces in the day, even if it's 10 minutes to write something or to do a voice recording in between something and then look back at it later. So yeah, I think it was just realizing that I did have the time and I would have to find it in a different way, because before I had kids, if I wanted to write, I could sit down and write. I could write every day. I could write consistently. And then after I had kids, I kind of told myself, you can't do this anymore. And then it took me a couple of years to realize that actually I can do this. I can be a mom and I can do something that is enjoyable for me and pursue it to a different degree. So time was my biggest challenge. And so now I've just found a way to manage some different segments here and there. It looks different than it did before, but it's still possible.
Manageable.
And for somebody with a highly perfectionistic personality, it's kind of an all or nothing sort of scenario. If I can't do this perfectly or I can't do it this way, then I don't want to do it. And so motherhood has really taught me that there are many different ways to do things and they can still be right.
That is for sure.
And then my greatest joy is definitely my daughters.
Okay, so what I want to ask you now is just, where can we find you online? Do you have a website, or should listeners and viewers go to the publisher's site to get information on your book?
For now, the publisher's site is the best way to find information on my book. So All Forgotten Now is available for pre-order. The ebook is $3.99. The print version, which is coming out this month, is $12. They're being produced here in Calgary. So that's Off Topic Publishing /books. And you'll find me there. There's a pre-order. There's also the contact email for the publisher if you wanted to reach me. And I'm on the Off Topic Publishing Facebook group and their writers and readers page. So that's a great way to find me.
Great. So I will include all of that information in the show notes so that viewers can see it on YouTube in the description, or if they're listening to the podcast, it'll be in the show notes description.
Lovely.
Okay, so I'm going to end here and say thank you so much for being with me today and sharing your story. I'm sure so many women will be able to get a little inspiration and also maybe even learn something from your story. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been really enjoyable.